Michelle Glass here, and welcome back to another one of our Chapter 18, Lecture 18 videos. And the topic for this presentation is the adenohypophysis. Now, I like to use this word even though it's long and very technical because it's easier for me to just write down this one word than the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland every single time. So you need to remember that, of course, these terms are talking about the same structure. Now, I personally like to refer to the adenohypophysis as the middle manager because this is like the floor manager, right? Remember, hypothalamus is the big boss telling the anterior pituitary gland what to do, and then it's the job of the anterior pituitary gland or the adenohypophysis to talk to the other endocrine gland organs and kind of activate them or turn them on. We will see that, we had the hypothalamus releasing regulatory hormones. We'll have the adenohypophysis releasing what are called tropic hormones or turn on. So I, on purpose, selected the color green for this presentation, just so you can think it's like the go light for the endocrine system. And the term tropic will be in a lot of the hormones that are released by the adenohypophysis. So that can help you keep those in mind. Okay, so we saw this slide already in the earlier video. This is, of course, showing us the regulatory hormones that are being released by the hypothalamus. And remember, the hypothalamus is the big boss, and then the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, or the adenohypophysis, is that middle manager. And so all of these regulatory hormones are going to be telling the adenohypophysis what hormones to make and when to make them, right? And so I mentioned in the earlier video that we would talk about what each of these hormones does in turn, and so that is embedded in this presentation here. Now, as we are looking at those regulatory hormones, they are controlling the release of 7 hormones which are being produced by the adenohypophysis. So we are going to go through all 7 of those now. We'll be talking about those 7 tropic hormones, what tissues they target, what effects what should I say here? What effects they trigger, and then also how they're controlled. So embedded into that conversation will be the regulatory hormones. So let us start. So notice that we have our GnRH being released from the hypothalamus. So GnRH, remember, is going to be called our corticotropic releasing hormone. So cortico, because ultimately we are going to be talking to our adrenal cortex. Tropic, because we're going to turn on ultimately our adrenal cortex. So GnRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, talks to the adenohypophysis, tells the adenohypophysis to make adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, so this term is saying exactly turn on the adrenal cortex. We can abbreviate all of our hormones. Remember, I have abbreviations. We need to know both. So we can abbreviate this as big ACTH. Now remember, our adrenal glands are sitting on top of our kidneys. They're somewhat triangular in shape. We've already talked about the adrenal medulla as being located in the interior, and the adrenal cortex would be the tissue on the outside. There are going to be 2 key hormones that we'll be talking about here that are released from the adrenal cortex. We'll actually talk more about the adrenal cortex in a later presentation. We're going to see here the glucocorticoids, which can be abbreviated big G, big C, little s, which are involved in glucose metabolism being released here, and also aldosterone, which is one that we will talk about again and again and again. It'll become an old friend by the time this semester is over. Now, the release of those glucocorticoids, high levels of GCs, will actually turn off the production of GnRH. So if you inhibit the production of GnRH, then of course you're going to stop the production of adrenocorticotropin hormone. We mentioned that most of this hormone regulation is through the negative feedback mechanism. So here is an example, releasing the GC is going to shut down the release of CRH, which shuts down the release of the adrenocorticotropic hormone. And we'll see this pattern repeat as we go through. Okay, next let's look at our regulatory hormone TRH. This of course stands for thyrotropin releasing hormone. TRH is going to talk to the adenohypophysis and trigger the release of our thyroid stimulating hormone. So this is called TSH. TSH is being produced by the gland called the thyroid gland, and we call this group of hormones the thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones can be abbreviated as T3 or T4. So these are two different classes or types of thyroid hormones. In real general terms, we can talk about these thyroid hormones as increasing cellular metabolism. We'll talk more about thyroid hormones in a later presentation, so we'll come back to these. Now, one of the key things to pay attention to with our thyroid gland is you do have to have iodine from your diet in order to produce your thyroxins or your thyroid hormones T3 and T4. So this is one of the reasons why your salt in the United States is iodized, to make sure that this is something that you're getting from your diet so that you can produce these hormones. Not having iodine can lead to hyperthyroidism, which can create a goiter. So you have this enlarged area in your throat here as a result of that. And my understanding too is this is the kind of origin for the Dr. Enough was to make sure that iodine was present for the population. We see another negative feedback mechanism here. So the increase of the thyroid hormones is going to inhibit the release of TRH, which in turn stops the production of the TSH. Okay, moving on to our growth hormone. This is our third one. So we're going to see our growth hormone releasing hormone talks to the adenohypophysis, triggers the release of our growth hormone. Now, growth hormone is going to talk to a variety of tissues. So it's going to talk to skeletal muscle and also chondrocytes. Remember, these are cartilage cells, which are going to be important in your development of your skeleton. The liver, epithelial tissue, and adipose tissue. So clearly, if you're increasing your skeletal muscle or your cartilage or your bone, then you need to have more epithelial tissue to surround that. So that makes sense, or line that. The liver is producing kind of a second hormone here, which is referred to as the somatomedians. Somatomedians would actually be what's talking to the chondrocytes and the skeletal muscle. And then the other thing that we'll see for somatomedians is they're going to be part of our negative feedback mechanism here. So we'll see that when those somatomedian levels get high, that actually causes the hypothalamus to make GnRH, which is, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which basically then shuts down the production of GnRH, which is going to turn off the production of growth hormone. So we're seeing that pattern. Now, what exactly will growth hormone tell these tissues to do? With the release of growth hormone, we'll see an increase in our protein synthesis. We will see stimulation of stem cells. So, of course, those stem cells are going to be required to make more bone, more epithelial tissue. We see also the trigger of the breakdown and the release of fatty acids. And then the breakdown of glycogen into glucose at the liver. So releasing more glucose into the bloodstream. Now, this is a breaking down and release of fatty acids is part of what's described as our glucose sparing activities. So glucose is really precious. Your neural tissue really prefers to use glucose. So anytime glucose is limited, then we're going to see hormones released to tell the body to, number one, break down the triglyceride and release fatty acid into the bloodstream. Number two, switch from breaking down glucose to breaking down fatty acid. So number three, you can save that glucose, whatever glucose is available for the neural tissue. This description of saving the glucose for the neural tissue and telling the rest of your body to switch to the breakdown of fatty acids can be described as glucose sparing. You're sparing the glucose for the neural tissue. Everything else is going to be relying on the breakdown of fatty acids for ATP production. So you would do glucose-sparing activities when you're not eating food. So if you're not eating food, you're not flooding the body with glucose. Glucose is going to be rare at that time, and so you're going to switch to these glucose-sparing activities. So that would be one example. Okay, moving on to our next hormone, we are looking here at the release of our prolactin releasing factor from the hypothalamus, which is going to trigger the adenohypophysis to make our prolactin. Prolactin is abbreviated PRL. Prolactin is going to talk to the mammary glands, and it's going to stimulate both gland development and milk production during pregnancy and while breastfeeding. Now, prolactin is going to be regulated by prolactin inhibiting hormone. So we'll see this is coming from the hypothalamus, which will inhibit the production of prolactin. Okay, our next one is looking at the release of the gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropin you can think of as like, go gonads, right? Because gonadotropin releasing hormone is talking to the adenohypophysis and then releasing FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and also LH, which is called luteinizing hormone. Now, both of these hormones are going to communicate with the cells of the gonads and pretty much trigger the release of what we can call sex hormones. So for ovaries, that's going to be the release of estrogen, progesterone, and also inhibin. And for testes, that would be testosterone and also inhibin. Clearly, we'll talk more about this when we're in the reproductive system. Now that estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are really seen as regulating the release of the gonadotropin releasing hormone. So as those sex hormone levels go up, the GnRH goes down, which is going to shut off the production of FSH and LH. And then finally, we have this hormone here called melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH. Notice that it's coming from this location here called the pars intermedia. Pars intermedia is in between the adenohypophysis and the neurohypophysis. So I've counted it here in with our 7 tropic hormones, but it's not really a tropic hormone, and it's not really coming from the adenohypophysis. MSH is going to talk to our melanocytes, which are those cells that we see in our skin and our eyes and our hair, and they're responsible for producing the pigment melanin. Now, the production of MSH is most active in fetal development in young children, and then in pregnancy we see it kicking up as well, even though it's unclear what its role would be. And then some diseases also can increase the activity of the pars intermedia and the release of MSH. We don't really see a lot of activity here in normal, healthy adult, non-pregnant, healthy adult humans, okay? We do see, of course, there's variation in the production of melanin at the melanocytes, but it's mostly activated by environmental conditions for those healthy non-pregnant adults. And that's it for now.